All right, welcome to another deep dive. And today, we're going to tackle something that's especially relevant for you UPSC aspirants out there, especially those of you getting ready for international relations. But even if you're not studying for exams, this is some fascinating stuff about how the world economy really works. Basically, the question is this: is the world a single, integrated global economy? Or are we still dealing with, like, interconnected but distinct national economies?
It's a big question, and the excerpt we're looking at today does a great job of laying out these different perspectives.
It really does, and it throws in some pretty wild statistics to show just how connected everything's become. So, you ready to get your mind blown a little bit?
Always up for a good mind-blowing. I like how this excerpt doesn't just present one side of the story, it digs into both sides. So you have the hyperglobalists who basically think we're headed for a world without borders, and then the globalization skeptics who are like, hold on, national economies are still a big deal.
So it's like a battle of ideas.
Right.
On one side, you've got the hyperglobalists saying that technology is making globalization inevitable, like some unstoppable force of nature.
And you can see their point, right? I mean, think about how much the internet and communication technologies have changed how we live and work. It's hard to imagine borders really containing the flow of information and ideas.
That's true. But then the skeptics are pushing back, saying this whole borderless global economy thing is a bit overblown.
They even suggest that all this hype about globalization is sometimes used to push certain agendas, like pushing for free market policies.
So are we stuck in the middle of this economic tug of war then? Is globalization this unstoppable force, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, the excerpt argues that it's not that simple. It's not about picking sides. The world economy is way more complex, and it's better to think of it as a globalizing economy, one that's always changing with different levels of integration.
Okay, I like that globalizing economy. It captures the sense that this is an ongoing process, and to understand how complicated this is, the excerpt gives us 4 key markers of how connected everything's become. Think of them as threads weaving together the global economy.
I love a good analogy. Those 4 markers are international trade, transnational production, the global division of labor, and this whole globalized financial system.
Let's start with international trade because it's grown like crazy in the last few decades. In 1960, worldwide exports were only about $629 million. But by 2003, that number shot up to a ridiculous $7.3 trillion.
That is insane. And it just shows how much global trade has exploded. Part of that was driven by the success of those export-oriented economies like Germany, Japan, and the tiger economies of East Asia. They really showed how powerful engaging in global trade could be.
They became the models for growth, basically proving that countries could leverage their strengths to compete globally. And it wasn't just about countries trading with each other. We also saw the rise of something called intra-firm trade, where companies started trading within their own global networks.
Yeah, like imagine a company like Apple. They might manufacture stuff in China, assemble phones in India, and then sell those phones everywhere. And all of that is happening within Apple's own network. That's intra-firm trade. And it shows how deep companies are getting into the global economy.
It's almost like they're creating their own little global economies within the big one. But wait a minute, what do the skeptics have to say about all this? Are they convinced by all this trade?
Well, not entirely. They point out that most trade still happens between developed countries and within regions. So while trade has definitely increased, it's not as global as it might seem on the surface.
So there's more to it than just the numbers. You have to understand the patterns and who's involved. And that brings us to transnational production. So, like, when you buy a smartphone or a car, it's probably made up of parts from all over the world before being assembled somewhere else, right?
Exactly. And that wouldn't happen without TNCs, those big transnational corporations, the giants of the global economy. They control a huge amount of global production and trade.
They've become masters at getting stuff from all over.
Yeah.
Right. They pull resources, expertise, and labor from everywhere. Yeah. It's like they're playing this huge game of economic chess, trying to figure out the best moves to optimize production.
And part of that is locating production in countries with cheaper labor, better tax laws, or other advantages. So while it's global, it also makes you wonder who's really winning in this system.
It makes you wonder if this spreads economic activity around the world, or if it's mostly just reinforcing the power structures that already exist.
That's a key point. And it leads us to the global division of labor. Imagine a world map where countries are color-coded by what they specialize in. We're starting to see patterns, although we don't have a fully integrated world labor market just yet.
So it's like Each country's finding its niche in the global economy.
Exactly. Like, lots of developed countries focus on high-tech manufacturing, while some developing countries specialize in agricultural products or raw materials.
But this division of labor isn't always fair, is it?
Good point. Think of it as a core and periphery structure. Some countries, usually the most developed ones, are at the core and benefit more from this division of labor. Meanwhile, others get stuck in the periphery, facing economic inequalities and even exploitation.
So it's not just about who makes what, but also who benefits most from the system. It makes you think about the real winners and losers of globalization. How does this connect to the invisible economy that was mentioned earlier?
That's an important connection. When we talk about the global division of labor, we can't forget that a huge amount of work, especially in developing countries, isn't part of the formal economy. This is the invisible economy, all the work that goes unnoticed and unpaid.
You're talking about things like housework, taking care of kids, looking after the elderly, and small-scale farming, right?
Exactly. These activities might not be traded on global markets, but they're vital to keeping economies and societies running.
It's like the backbone of society, but often hidden from view.
Mm-hmm.
And women end up doing a lot of this work, don't they?
Absolutely. And that's where the global division of labor and the invisible economy come together. Women's unpaid work often subsidizes the system, allowing for cheaper labor in developing countries and boosting the profits of those global companies.
So economics isn't just about numbers and markets. It's about people's lives, their work, and how power is distributed.
Exactly. It makes us look beyond the usual measures of economic activity and recognize the contributions of everyone, whether their work is formally recognized or not.
Now let's move on to our final marker, the globalized financial system. Picture trillions of dollars flying around the world at light speed. It's this massive, borderless flow of money that's always affecting global markets.
It's a crazy system that really got going with deregulation back in the 70s and 80s. That's when money started flowing more freely across borders. Then technology, especially in the 90s, supercharged everything and made financial transactions almost instant.
We went from snail mail to email in a blink, and even currencies are globalized now. They're traded all over, their values affected by global forces.
The amount of currency trading every day is mind-blowing. Back in 2001, it was more than $4 trillion, which is more than the entire GDP of the USA. That just shows how huge and interconnected this global financial system really is.
But this raises a big question. Is all this money flying around a good thing or a recipe for disaster? Some people say it boosts economic growth, while others worry about instability and financial crises.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It can help with investment and economic activity, but it can also make things riskier and economies more vulnerable to shocks.
So we've got these four markers. Trade, production, the division of labor, and finance. They're all linked, creating this massive web we call the global economy. But before we try to untangle it further, let's quickly recap.
Good idea. We've explored these four markers, highlighting both the impressive growth in interconnectedness and the potential downsides, especially for those on the periphery.
And we've introduced the idea of the invisible economy, which makes us rethink what economic activity really means and acknowledge all that unpaid labor, most of which is done by women.
It reminds us that globalization isn't just this abstract thing. It affects people's lives, their work, and their well-being.
And for you UPSC folks, this deep dive is super important for those international relations questions. It's about understanding the different arguments and the evidence behind them. But even if you're not studying for exams, we hope this has given you some things to think about when it comes to how the world economy works.
Absolutely. It's all about looking at the bigger picture and seeing how everything is connected in the global economy.
Now, before we go deeper into this complicated topic, we'll pause for a moment. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because in part 2, we'll be back with even more insights and thought-provoking questions.
Yeah, it's really eye-opening when you start thinking about that invisible economy, It's like a whole hidden layer of work that's keeping things going, even if it doesn't show up in your traditional economic stats.
It's a big reminder that economics is about more than just numbers and markets. It's tied in with social stuff, gender roles, and who has power. And for those of you prepping for the UPSC, this is key to understanding development issues globally.
Totally. So we've got those four markers of interconnectedness, trade, production, the division of labor, and finance, and we've woven in this idea of the invisible economy. But zooming out for a second, how globalized is economic life, really?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's not a simple answer as we've seen. It's not a yes or no thing.
Right. It's this super intricate web woven together with all these threads of globalization, but it's not about being totally integrated or totally separate. It's about recognizing the different degrees of interconnectedness you find across sectors and regions.
It's more like a spectrum. Some parts of economic life are super globalized, while others are more local. And even within those, there are all these nuances and layers.
The author of this excerpt makes a really interesting point here. They argue that we should think of the world economy as a globalizing economy, a dynamic process with both unifying and fragmenting forces at play.
So it's not about reaching some perfect state of globalization. It's more about acknowledging this constant change and adaptation that's always reshaping the global economic landscape.
Exactly. And this means it's super important to stay informed and really think critically about the trends and forces shaping our world. That's where the deep dive comes in. We're here to help you untangle these complicated issues and get a better understanding of everything.
We're like your guides on this intellectual journey, helping you connect the dots and see the big picture. And for our UPSC listeners, this deep dive into economic globalization is essential if you want to tackle those international relations questions.
It's not just about memorizing facts and figures. It's about understanding the different arguments, the perspectives, and the evidence behind them.
Exactly. It's about being able to analyze and explain these ideas, which is key for doing well on those exams. But even if you're not prepping for exams, being able to think critically about this stuff is super important in today's world.
It helps you become a more informed citizen, someone who can participate in these conversations about what's shaping our world.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up this dive into how complex economic globalization is, we want to leave you with something to think about. We talked a lot about the invisible economy and how much work, often unpaid, goes into keeping everything running.
And how a lot of that work falls on the shoulders of women, especially in developing countries.
So here's the question. If we recognize how important this invisible economy is, how does that change our understanding of global economic power and interconnectedness?
It makes us rethink our assumptions and look beyond the traditional ways we measure economic activity. It encourages us to see the world differently, acknowledging everyone's contribution, whether their work is formally recognized or not.
It pushes us to look beyond the usual globalization stories and consider a more inclusive and nuanced view of economic power and how everything's connected. And for those of you working towards the UPSC, it's a reminder that international relations isn't just about treaties and political alliances.
It's about understanding people's lived experiences across the globe and how those experiences are shaped by these big economic forces. It's about seeing how global trends affect individuals, communities, and whole nations.
It's about seeing the human side of globalization. As you keep going on your UPSC journey, remember to keep asking those critical questions. Don't just accept the main narratives. Dig deeper, look at things from different angles, and connect the ideas to what's happening in the real world.
And never underestimate how powerful curiosity can be. The more you learn, the more you realize how much there is to discover. That's what makes studying international relations so fascinating and so challenging.
It's a journey of exploration and discovery. And here at the Deep Dive, we're excited to be your guides. We hope this deep dive into economic globalization has given you valuable insights and sparked your curiosity to learn more.
So keep those brains working, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep into the complexities of our world.
And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who's interested in understanding what shapes our globalized world. Until next time, happy exploring.
You know, it's really something when you start thinking about global power shifting because we finally recognize that invisible economy. It's like we've been looking at the world through this tiny little keyhole, and now we're finally getting the whole picture. Yeah, for sure. It makes you realize that economic power isn't just about who runs the factories or controls the financial markets. It's also about who's doing the essential work that makes everything run smoothly, even if it's not always seen or valued the way it should be.
And for you UPSC folks out there, this is crucial. When you're looking at international relations, you need to go beyond just the headlines and the numbers you see. You got to think about those dynamics that aren't so obvious, the power structures that might be hidden at first.
It's like understanding how the formal and informal stuff intertwine, like the stuff you see and the stuff you don't in shaping how the global economy works.
And recognizing that globalization isn't some far-off abstract idea.
Yeah.
It has a real impact on people, their jobs, their families, and their communities.
It shapes the kinds of opportunities they have, the choices they can make, and what they can imagine for their future.
So as you keep going on your UPSC journey, keep asking those critical questions. Don't be afraid to challenge the common narratives. Dig deeper, connect the dots, and look at things from different angles.
And whatever you do, don't lose that curiosity. There's so much to uncover in this world. The more you explore, the more you realize how much there is to learn. That's what makes studying international relations so exciting and challenging at the same time.
It's a journey of exploration and discovery, and here at the Deep Dive, we're thrilled to be your guides. We really hope this deep dive into economic globalization has been insightful and made you want to learn even more.
We hope it's inspired you to keep learning and thinking about these complicated issues.
So, if you like this episode, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into fascinating topics. And don't forget to share this episode with your friends, especially your fellow UPSC comrades who are on this learning journey with you. Until next time, keep diving deep.